When I was just 10, we moved to a new house in a different town. I was starting a new elementary school as a 5th grader, which is always tough. It was a bit awkward at first since all the kids already knew each other, and I was just some random new kid entering the scene. In my elementary school, you had to sit with the kids from your class during lunch. I remember the first few days being really awkward. Kids at that age are extremely judgmental, and as the new kid, I was automatically an outsider, making it even harder to make new friends. But during those initial days of being the new kid on the block, I actually met a few of the kids in the neighborhood. One of them was Dan, who went to a private school, so we didn't have any classes together. We met while I was biking down the street, and he asked if I had just moved into the house on the corner. We started hanging out from there. A few days later, I met Alex. Alex actually rang my doorbell one day and asked my parents for me. I was confused when they called me to the door and introduced me to him. He said he lived down the block and wanted to know if I liked video games. Of course, I said yes, and he invited me over to his house to play Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. I didn't have that game, but really wanted it, so I said yes. We walked to his house, which was the corner house at the opposite end of the block. Right away, I noticed that it looked less nice than the others. It was the same size as most houses, but it looked run down and not taken care of. There was no grass in the front yard, just 2 big patches of dirt with a walkway cutting through them. Inside, the house was just as messy. It reminded me of something out of a hoarder's house. Boxes and junk were piled everywhere in every room. He led me to the basement, which smelled like 15 cats lived down there. But strangely, I didn't see any pets. The basement was a disaster. It might have been the messiest room in the house. We sat on a worn-out brown leather couch in front of the TV. He had a GameCube and a PS2. He booted up San Andreas, and we played 2-player mode. It was actually fun, and for a moment, I thought I might actually like Alex and want to be friends with him. After a couple of hours, I was ready to go home. When I told him I had to leave, he seemed really disappointed, like he wanted to keep hanging out. But we had already been playing for a while, and I just wanted to go. He even followed me halfway home before I had to politely say, "See you later," which was my friendly way of saying, "All right, go away now." That was the first warning sign that Alex was a little off, but at the time, I didn't find it too concerning. The next day, Alex rang my doorbell again and asked my parents if I could come over. This time, we played GameCube in my room for about an hour. Not to sound mean, but I was starting to feel uncomfortable around him. He got physically too close to me, and something about him just felt off. The following day after school, he rang the bell again. I wasn't in the mood to hang out, so I told my mom to say I wasn't feeling well. That same day, I rode my bike up to Dan's house to see if he could hang out. He was down, so we started riding our bikes further up the block. That turned out to be a mistake because as we passed Alex's house, he suddenly appeared on his front stoop as if he had been waiting by the window. It was weird and awkward since I had just told him I was sick. As we passed, I told Dan that I had hung out with Alex and that I thought he was a little weird. Dan was shocked, saying that Alex's whole family was crazy. That's when I found out Alex was actually 12 years old, 2 years older than me. From that point on, I decided to avoid him. The next weekend, Alex came to my door again asking for me. I had already told my mom to say I wasn't home if he came back, so she did. But that night, I woke up to my window being completely open, with a cool breeze blowing into my room. It was a chilly September night, and I knew for a fact that I had closed my window. I sat up, confused, when I suddenly felt something poke my foot. I screamed. At the foot of my bed was Alex. He told me to be quiet. It was just him. Before I could even ask what he was doing in my room, he explained that his parents were fighting, and he wanted to sleep with me. He had climbed through my window. I was in shock. I told him to get out. He begged me to let him stay in bed with me. Again, I told him to get out. Watching him turn and climb out of my window was a disturbing sight. I immediately closed and locked the window, then ran straight to wake up my parents. They were in disbelief. The next day, they went down the block to talk to Alex's parents, but it didn't go well. His crazy mom just laughed in their faces and took no accountability for her son's actions. My parents probably didn't want to involve the police since Alex was just a kid, but things only got worse. A few nights later, I woke up to knocks at my window. My blinds were closed, but I knew for a fact it was Alex. I didn't answer, but the knocking went on for 5 minutes. I even heard him try to open the window. My heart was racing. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I went to tell my parents, but They told me to just ignore it. I think they weren't as concerned because, again, Alex was just a kid. A few days later, Dan, another friend from school, and I were biking near my house when we passed Alex's house. I saw him run to the window and just watch us. I told my friends about what happened, and they found it hilarious. My other friend even joked that he sounded like someone who would live in a house that gross. That night, for the final time, I woke up to a sound in my room, the sound of my window shattering. I screamed as I saw Alex climbing through the window through the closed blinds. I ran straight to my parents' room and woke them up. By the time my dad rushed outside, Alex had already run back to his house. My dad chased him all the way there, but Alex made it inside before he could catch him. My dad pounded on the door until Alex's parents answered. He must have said something that got through to them because they agreed to pay for the broken window in exchange for my dad not calling the police. They paid for the repairs, and I never heard from Alex again. I saw him once or twice in front of his house over the next couple of years, but eventually his family moved away, thankfully. Looking back, I think there's a real chance Alex was planning to do something dangerous, maybe even hurt me, just because he saw me hanging out with other kids. I still wonder what kind of person Alex grew up to be. It was around 2013 or 2014. My brother was about 7 or 8 at the time, and we had just moved into a new house to be closer to school and for cheaper rent. It was a pretty nice house, all things considered. It even had a cozy fireplace for the winter. My brother was really into Batman and had this Batman car that would light up and make noises when you pressed a button. It was his favorite toy, so he played with it often. One afternoon, he came inside from playing out back and told us he found something. Naturally, my mom and I asked what it was. He held up a picture of a young boy, the kind you get when parents pay extra for school photos. The picture was dirty and worn, to the point where you couldn't even see the year it was taken. We figured some parent had lost their kid's picture. No big deal. But then my brother said something that confused me. A couple of days later, my mom asked if I had seen my brother getting up at night. I told her about waking up to him talking, but that I hadn't noticed anything else. She said he had been acting strange, but we both shrugged it off as just him being a kid. My bed was right across from my door, so if I turned over, I could see into the hallway. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom. Since I've always been afraid of the dark, I left the hallway light on, knowing my dad would turn it off when he got up. As I lay in bed facing my door, a sudden noise made me jump. It was my brother's Batman car making noises. I got up to tell him to stop playing so late, but when I walked into his room, he was asleep. The toy was across the room on the floor, still making noise. I walked over, turned it off, and went back to bed. Over the next few days, my brother wouldn't stop talking about Buddy. It started to really freak me out, so I decided to check with our neighbors. One house didn't even have kids, and the other was vacant. That's when I started to worry. My dad dismissed it, saying it was just an imaginary friend, and I went along with it because I couldn't think of any other explanation. But almost every night, someone in our family, my mom, dad, sister, or me, would hear the Batman toy go off and have to get up to turn it off. I told them I had done it too and brought up my brother talking to someone at night. My dad insisted the toy was probably motion activated, but when we bought it, there was nothing on the packaging about motion sensors. My sister and I were so freaked out that we started sleeping in my room together. One night, we were talking, trying to keep each other calm, when we heard it again, my brother's toy. We both turned toward my open door and froze in horror. The toy rolled past the doorway, by itself. We screamed and ran to our parents' room. They were furious, thinking my brother was playing a cruel joke on us since we were already scared. But what he said next chilled me to the bone. It wasn't me, he said. Buddy wanted to play. That night, my parents threw the toy away. They took out the batteries and tossed it in the trash. My sister and I were relieved, but the next day, my brother had the toy again. My parents accused him of taking it out of the trash, but he shook his head. Buddy got it for me. This time, they broke the toy into small pieces and threw it away for good. My brother was upset, but my parents got him a new Batman figurine to make up for it. Everything seemed fine after that. About a week later, when we all felt that Buddy was finally gone, something else happened. My mom was cooking chicken breasts on the George Foreman grill on the counter. She stepped into the living room to ask us something when, suddenly, we all heard a loud crash from the kitchen. We ran in to see the grill halfway across the floor, as if it had been thrown. My mom swore it hadn't been anywhere near the edge of the counter. My dad had no explanation. After that, nothing else happened. We moved out about a year later, but to this day, I still wonder if my brother's imaginary friend, Buddy, wasn't so imaginary after all. When I was about 8 years old, I experienced something that still chills me to this day. My parents had me late in life, and my 2 older siblings were at least 10 years older than me. One night, I was abruptly woken by a commotion downstairs. I cracked my bedroom door open and could hear my parents panicking about something, though I couldn't tell what. Curious but hesitant, I walked to the top of the staircase and called out, "Mom? Dad?" My mother appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face tense. "Go back to bed," she said firmly. There was something in her tone that made me listen without question. I lay back in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard the front door slam shut, followed by complete silence. I assumed my parents had left, though I had no idea why. A while later, I was woken again by noises downstairs, the front door opening, footsteps, and soft thuds. Drawers and cabinets opened and closed. The fridge hummed as it was pulled open. I convinced myself it was my older brother, Chris. At 18, he was already driving and often came home late, raiding the fridge before heading to bed. This was normal, I reassured myself. Logical. Then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. They grew louder until they stopped right outside my room. My door creaked open. I didn't sit up or move. I just stared at the dark silhouette standing in the doorway. "Chris?" I whispered. "Mom? Dad?" I waited. "Who's there?" No response. The shadow lingered for a moment before silently closing the door. I lay frozen, my heart pounding. I convinced myself it was my dad checking on me after getting home. Maybe he just didn't want to wake me. Minutes passed. Then, unable to shake my unease, I crept downstairs. The house was dark, but as I reached the kitchen doorway, I froze. A tall figure stood motionless in the middle of the room. "Dad?" I asked hesitantly. A deep voice I didn't recognize answered, "Go back upstairs." Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, diving under my covers and squeezing my eyes shut. My mind raced. Why did my dad's voice sound like that? The thought that a stranger might be in the house never even crossed my innocent mind. Then, the front door opened again. A sudden burst of commotion followed, my parents' voices. I rushed to the top of the stairs, and they looked stunned to see me awake. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. They exchanged a glance before my mother said, "Chris had a little accident, but he's going to be fine." It wasn't until months later that I learned the truth. Chris had been in a car accident, driving when he shouldn't have been. My parents had gotten a call from the hospital in the middle of the night and rushed out, leaving the house in their panic. They never locked the door. When I asked my dad if he had come into my room earlier, his face went pale. They had been gone for hours. My mother's panic turned to fury as she yelled at my father for forgetting to lock up. My story about the shadow in my doorway and the figure in the kitchen sent my dad scrambling for his gun while my mom called the police. The police arrived, took my statement, and searched the house. My parents were mortified, having to admit they left their young child alone in an unlocked house in the middle of the night. Nothing appeared to be stolen, and as terrifying as it was, whoever had broken in seemingly had no intention of harming me. Still, the thought of a stranger wandering through our home while I was asleep, standing in my doorway, lurking in the kitchen, is something that will haunt me forever. And at 8 years old, I was too naive to realize just how much danger I had been in.